a musician, a xenomorph named Mozart, and a lot of Queen Xeno's jelly drug. These are the three major elements of this fascinating 4-issue comic book called Aliens, Music of the Spears. To be honest, the book outdid itself, and that's precisely why I don't want to waste any time building up a long intro, so let's quickly dive into it. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Issue number 1. Now, the comic begins in a pretty interesting fashion, something you won't expect from an Alien comic. So the first panel has a bunch of ninjas, clad in black and doing some ninja shit. But where are they? And what are they doing? It was all unfolding in Manhattan on Christmas Eve. A man named Ahiro was leading his followers to a super secret lab of this major company called MedTech. Ahiro was a man of many talents. He knew how to evade the cameras and get into a lab that even the company's VPs didn't know existed. He knew how to neutralize the guards, no matter how many. But this time around, he was even surprised to find no security protecting the lab. The surprise soon transformed into fear as another man named Higuchi fell. He had been attacked by a xenomorph. 3 Xenos attacked the men, and their dreadful music, like the song of screaming demons and bloody swords, filled the vicinity. The next to fall was Yoshi. He was slow, but not Ahiro, who struck the biomechanical demons with his sword that could cut through almost anything. The others chose to follow Ahiro's example and struck the Xenos at the joints, which didn't bleed. One of the men slashed at a Xeno's body and got himself showered with its acidic blood. Not a happy experience. It wasn't long before the ninjas took down the Xenos. I'm telling you, plot armor is the only armor you will ever need. Anyway, the men reached their destination, a lab that housed ovomorphs. Actually, it's wrong to call it a lab. It was more of a xenomorph nest, a hive if you will. Ahiro and his ovomorph hunting ninjas fixed one of the eggs with some device to ensure that the facehugger did not attack and wasted no time in fleeing once that was done. But the question is, why did Ahiro go through all this trouble and lose 3 men? What did a mercenary like him need an ovomorph for? The answer is simple. Someone asked him to do that. You see, 3 weeks before the incident I just described, an eccentric musician by the name of Damon Eddington went to meet Keen at Synsound, the company for which Damon worked. He had come to Keen with a very unusual request. He wanted a xenomorph. Keen rightly pointed out that he was neither in weapons nor in medicine. Damon explained that he needed a xenomorph specimen for the sound. He wanted the animal, for it sang from a throat of steel. It screamed with a tongue of flame, and using its screams and screeches, Damon believed he could create the symphony of hate. He was tired of how Synsound controlled the music on a global scale, but what he hated more than that was the declining quality of original music. With the synthetics and AI in town, Synsound was now able to bring back the voices of legends like Elvis Presley. With synthetics singing songs in the voice and look of the musical legends, original artists like Damon were being pushed to the back seat. And when people started getting bored with what they were listening to, Synsound re-engineered the synthetics to be more outrageous and shocking. So now, Damon wanted to transform his hatred for the world and treatment of music into music. Music that would be a work of rage directed towards Synsound itself. But you know what? Synsound agreed to the idea and promised Damon to give him what he wanted. Of course, there was a certain monetary aspect involved, but there was another reason as well. Synsound's president, Yoriku, was once supposed to sleep with a famous model, but his place was taken by a MedTech executive. From that day onward, Yoriku has been looking for a way to get back at MedTech, and this was his moment. Not only did Yoriku authorize the stealing of an ovomorph from the MedTech facility, but he also asked Keen to ensure that MedTech knew of Synsound's involvement. And now Keen contacted Ahiro, the man we met at the beginning of the issue. After Ahiro and his team left, MedTech security officer Rice came to the scene to bring the culprits to justice. To this end, he did not shy away from using a live xenomorph as a canine. This xenomorph, called Blue or Bloodhound, was brought to the street, and although the security team ensured that Blue could not bite or slash, they could not control its brute force. On the streets, Blue smelled some jelly that a jelly junkie was about to consume, and since the jelly did not come from Blue's hive, it meant that the jelly was from an enemy hive. So Blue goes out of control, slaughters the man consuming the jelly, and calms down. Oh yes, 2 things I should clear up. 1. Xenomorphs are mortal enemies of xenomorphs from other hives, and a watered-down version of the royal jelly that the queen produces was being used as a drug. Anyway, Damon gets a call from Keen, who gives him the good news, and Damon leaves for Presley Hall to check out the ovomorph. Here he meets with 2 bioengineers. Damon liked Michael Brangwyn because he was a fan of Damon, but did not share the same feeling for Darcy Vance, who was just delighted at the prospect of working with an alien. Nevertheless, a new problem presented itself. The facility to house the creature, the security, and the cost of procuring the ovomorph had become so high that Synsound did not offer a clone that would serve as the host for the facehugger. Nevertheless, the bioengineers had a solution. They could simply get one of the guys from the religious cults who worship the xenomorphs. Members of these cults would give up anything to serve as a willful host of facehuggers. They contact Ahiro to find such a subject, and find a subject he does. Issue 2. When Michael and Darcy ask why Damon needed the alien, he says he wanted it for the music. Darcy was curious, or rather disappointed, that Damon did not wish to study the creature in any other way, but he reminds her that he was a composer and not a scientist. All he wanted was for the egg to hatch and the alien to be born shrieking in blood. He wanted to fight and kill and scream so that Damon could record every sound. Soon, a hero arrived with one of the cultists, but Damon recognizes this man. He's Ken, the best guitarist that Damon ever had the privilege of hearing. You see, Ken started taking the jelly when it first came to town, and under its influence, he began to appreciate his music, although people told him it was just noise. So anyway, Ken started taking more of that stuff and started to like his music more, so much so that there came a point when he did not need a guitar to play his music. All he needed was to move his fingers, and the music would play in his ears. Clearly the man was tripping because of the jelly. While Ken narrated his story to Damon, Ahiro prepared the Ovomorph. Soon they kept Ken and the Ovomorph in the same room, and it didn't take long for the facehugger to do its thing. Once that was done, they placed Ken in a holding cell of sorts, and waited for the alien to burst out of Ken, just like Damon wanted. It took a good 14 hours for Ken to wake up. His vitals were through the roof, and he could no longer hear his music, nor did he hear the voice of his so-called god. Clearly, Ken regretted his decision, but he reached the point of no return. After another couple of hours, the chest burster was ready to break out of Ken and serve Damon. The newborn creature sings a melody of seared flesh and spilled blood, a song that shreds Damon Eddington's soul into a million pieces and more. In the hours that followed, Damon keenly listened to the sounds over and over as he watched the creature grow and nourish itself. Damon names the Xenomorph Mozart. He believed it was the right name. So young, so talented, and with such an appetite. As Damon watches his demonic child grow, he feels the rage it bears in its every moment. Damon Eddington knew that it was to be an alien, not at home in this world, unappreciated and misunderstood. To Damon, this creature was the physical manifestation of all his frustration and wrath, a poem of ecstasy and fire in one. Hearing the name Mozart, Darcy asks Michael Brangwyn if he thought Damon was crazy. Michael didn't think Damon was crazy, just that the man was dedicated to his music. More like intense. Nevertheless, while looking at Mozart, Darcy wondered if aliens were capable of attachments, but she also knew that xenomorphs are not really made for things like attachment. All you could hope for was for it to pause for a moment before it killed you in cold blood. Damon falls asleep in his apartment while staring at a bottle filled with jelly. He couldn't control himself from emptying the vial after waking up. The man begins to lose his mind. Although he felt free from the nitty-gritty of the world, he didn't hear the music that Ken had promised to hear. So he arrives at Presley Hall, demanding to hear the creature live. But Mozart does not sing to his tunes. Xenomorphs do not sing to a human's tunes. He retreats to the darker end of the cage and only hisses, leaving Damon bereft of the screams he so badly wanted to hear. So he orders Darcy and Michael to get Mozart something he could fight and tear and kill. Something that's alive. Michael returns from the animal center with a cat and a dog, which are led inside Mozart's cage. Damon prepares to record the biomechanical monster, but he only gives a short hiss, like hot steel thrust in cold water, and Damon fancies he hears amusement and contempt in it. For Mozart, destroying cats and dogs is no more challenging than men stepping on ants. Naturally, Damon asks Michael to bring something bigger. Cows and bulls, maybe? Calls were made, orders were placed, and soon a bull was brought to the cage. The only sound Damon gets that satisfies him comes when Mozart fights the bull. The horns actually tear Mozart open, spraying the bull's hide with acidic blood. The bull continues to bellow until Mozart tears off its head, but the bull's cries of death were stronger than Mozart's screams of torture. Now this gave Damon more ideas. You see, to make Mozart really sing, the creature needed to be hurt. Now Damon wanted predators, animals that could really hurt the creature. In the dead of night, Ahiro and his ninja friends went shopping at the Manhattan Zoo. Damon also goes shopping, but he enters one of the dimly lit alleys, looking for some jelly, which, contrary to what he believed, was clouding his mind rather than clearing it. Nevertheless, both Damon and Ahiro returned to Presley Hall. Ahiro had brought with him a black panther, and Damon smiled at its sight, knowing that he would get some more parts of his twisted music. The panther is allowed inside the cage. It leaps to attack. Mozart falls back for a moment as the giant cat's claws tear through his carapace, and when it buries its snout in its midsection, Mozart screams. To Damon, the sound is exquisite and orgasmic, and he thinks of the music he will blend with it, and the phrases from the 20th century apostles of rage like Corigliano and hymns. But then the panther dies at Mozart's hand, and the music stops. Ahiro asks if he should perhaps bring another animal, but Damon rightly tells him that no animal was vicious enough to keep Mozart busy for long. But Ahiro tells him, "There's one, Mr. Eddington, give me time to capture it." So Damon begins to work with what he's got, and created the musical structure into which he fits the alien's cries. But he needs many more of these cries. 3 days later, Ahiro returned with not one, but 5 crates, and these crates carried men. Although from the worst bars and drug houses, they were still human and needed to be treated as such. Michael was not happy with the idea and protested, but Damon wanted to go ahead with the plan. However, before the men could be fed to Mozart, plans had to be executed. It was decided that the men would be given rifles that would shoot bolts of energy, not strong enough to kill Mozart, but capable of inflicting huge pain. Damon wanted to make the cage bigger and more complex, so that the men had a fighting chance, so that they could defend themselves and prolong the fight. A few days later, the first man is thrown into the feeder cage with his stun gun. He walks in with his finger on the trigger and fires as soon as he sees Mozart. The alien cries in pain and Damon smiles. He was getting what he had wanted for so long. The man fires at Mozart repeatedly, and Damon hears his most desired sound again and again. It almost seemed for a moment that Damon had had enough, but then everything comes to a standstill as Mozart kills the man. Issue 3. That was only the first of 5 deaths, and by the time the 5th man died, pierced by the spears of Mozart's fangs, Damon Eddington had all he needed for his grand composition, all except the finale. So far, there was only ignorant rage, but to end his masterwork, Damon needed more, a sense of compassion and intimacy, and Damon turned towards Darcy. Meanwhile, Rice from MedTech was still on the hunt for those who stole the Ovomorph. If not death, at least he wanted payback, and was planning to take his Xenomorph Blue once again on the streets to sniff for pheromones of the stolen egg. Back at Presley Hall, Damon and Michael were in conversation. Michael suggested that Damon visit the Helltones concert for a change from all that was going on, but Damon calls them trash and rubbishes the idea. Michael goes away, leaving Damon and Darcy alone with Mozart. As expected, Damon makes his move on Darcy as she was feeding Mozart. He unplugs the smallest one of his keyboards and hits Darcy with it, knocking her out cold. Why exactly did Damon want to use Darcy as a victim of Mozart? Well, it would not be like the others. Mozart would kill her, of course. However, it would bring him pain to destroy a human he knew and someone he had depended on all along. Damon believed that the shrieks of Mozart's psychic pain were what he needed for his masterpiece to be truly complete. Damon will tell Michael that he was not there when it happened, and that Darcy must have carried her communications experiment too far, but it won't explain the broken keyboard or why the cage door was still locked. But Damon does not even think of that or care. He's cruising in overdrive on the jelly of the gods. Every microphone, every recording device goes on, and Mozart uses his senses to follow Damon's movement. He also feels the electrical pulse of the microphones overhead, which tells him he's gonna be fed, and maybe he'll have to fight. After a while, Darcy wakes and realizes what Damon is about to do. She's shocked at the sight of just how far Damon has gone, just how crazy he's become, that he's okay with committing murder. But Damon tells her that it's not really murder because there's a stun gun inside that she can make use of. He lowers the feeder into Mozart's cage, and Darcy walks out of it really slowly. She tries to breathe softly and walk even softer. She grabs the stunner and prepares herself for Mozart, who finally notices her in the cage and slowly approaches her. However, something goes wrong, or right, and Mozart does not attack, at least not initially. She cannot help but wonder why he does not roar or attack. However, she knows she must concentrate on getting the weapon, not on the working of alien minds. Ever so carefully, she embraces the stunner and flicks on the power switch. Mozart notices her, but she's relieved to hear its low hum and not the powerful attacking growl. She thinks maybe it has all been worthwhile. Maybe it won't hurt her. Then again, Mozart had paused a moment before he killed her. That's all she had hoped for from a monster like Mozart. Our girl does not waste time before firing a white streak of fire, which surges through Mozart. It screams, and in its cry, Damon hears the sound of a child betrayed, a savage innocence violated. That's precisely the sound he wanted. Darcy fires her gun again and again on the right side of Mozart, making him move to the left while she gets closer and closer to the passageway that she had helped construct. Mozart's unending screams delight Damon, making him push the volume higher and higher, until feedback squeals through the room, resonating in every cell of human and alien, confusing and slowing Mozart. He stops for a moment, and Darcy takes advantage of the distraction to move another precious meter nearer the passageway. In another moment, Mozart counters her move, and since she can count on no further distractions from Damon, she creates a final one herself by throwing the gun at the alien, scaring it. The alien recoils, not realizing the device itself is harmless. It gives Darcy just enough time to dash into the passageway. Mozart is quick to follow her, and Damon exults in the sounds that he will soon have since Darcy is now defenseless. Darcy dives for a tunnel just large enough for a human, too small for an alien. Mozart is unable to grab her leg, but in his attempt, he slashes her ankle to the bone. She still crawls into the tunnel, beyond Mozart's reach, and fumbles with a recessed catch. She had found an escape panel that she and Michael had designed for the workmen in case Mozart's sedation had worn off when they were inside the cage. She lies 3 feet below the cage floor, unable to move, feeling the blood leave her body and her consciousness slip away. Meanwhile, Damon anticipated the sounds he would hear at any moment, and turned on every sonic booster on the board, sending more power than ever before through the system. But Mozart had reached a point in the cage where the sounds were not getting recorded. Damon listened but hears nothing. Desperately, he grabs a portable recorder and a mic and turns them on and runs to the cage. He realizes that he will have to open the door to capture the music. He thinks to himself, all I have to do is just open the door and step in. He will be busy with her in the passage, and when the music ends, I step back out. He'll never see me. How wrong was he? You see, while consuming the last vial of the jelly, Damon had spilled some on himself, and the jelly came from a different hive, an enemy hive. As soon as Damon opened the cage door, Mozart attacked and killed him in cold blood. As Damon lay there, drenched in his own blood, and pieces of flesh and bone protruding out of his body, his last thought was that the mic was still on. Now that Mozart had found an escape, he enters the concert hall in Presley Hall, where he destroys the androids who were performing. Mozart goes on a rampage, only to be brought down by Rice from MedTech and his men. Later, Michael finds a wounded Darcy and tends to her. 3 months later, Michael performs Damon's piece of work, which he has completed himself after Damon's death. The lackluster crowd in the small concert venue does not quite appreciate it. Marvelous verdict. This novel turned out to be a lot better than I expected. If you're into creepy, suspenseful, slow-burn sci-fi horror thrillers packed with 1990s nostalgia and a cyberpunk vibe, this one's a must-read. Fans of alien novels, especially those that break the usual mold, like Robert Sheckley's Alien Harvest, will find this one right up their alley. The horror elements really surprised me with how genuinely creepy they were. Sure, there were a few gruesome scenes, but the real scare comes from the more subtle, suspenseful moments. The story nails the idea of moral horror. Watching the main characters slowly turn evil as they chase their goals is both chilling and fascinating. There are cruel twists, drug-induced horrors, a hefty dose of 1990s cynicism, and a cast of unsettling characters that makes this novel far creepier than you might expect from an Aliens book. On the sci-fi front, the novel is a treat for cyberpunk fans. It's set in a classic cyberpunk dystopia with powerful megacorporations and atmospheric urban landscapes filled with rain, snow, flying cars, and glowing lights. While there's no cyberspace or hacking, the setting makes a strong case for the theory that Alien and Blade Runner exist in the same universe. The novel also features an updated version of 1990s tech and culture. Music is still on physical media. Popular 90s musicians are recreated as androids, and instead of smartphones, people use vidphones. If you're a fan of the 90s and cyberpunk, this novel is a nostalgic joyride. Additionally, the thriller elements are masterfully done. This novel leans more towards a traditional slow-burn suspense thriller, rather than an action-packed story. There are some fast-paced scenes, but the focus is on building gradual suspense with small cliffhangers. This undeniable feeling of impending doom, obsessed characters, secret corporate plots, and mild detective elements that keep you hooked until the end. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone!